It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about Spear by Nicola Griffith, who is one of the progenitors, I would say, of the Wizards versus Lesbians genre. And we will be circling back to cover more of her work in retro episodes going forward.
Yes,
But,
I mean, she's really one of the leading lights of the classic lesbian science fiction world. So
indeed.
So it's not surprising that it's great that her most recent one is a classic Wizards versus Lesbians kind of book.
Yes, this is about as Wizards versus Lesbians as you can get, including like one of the all-time wizards.
Yes.
But,
So, are there wizards? Yes, there are in fact 2 wizards
Yes.
and also 2 lesbians. Each
Yes.
lesbian gets her own personal wizard
that is true.
to fight.
But what about the plot?
Yes. Do you want to summarize the plot?
I can summarize the plot. Okay. So there is a little girl growing up in a cave with her mom. And the cave is in Wales. And we are in Arthurian times. The girl's mom is paranoid and keeps the little girl from the world as her treasure or her payment, depending on what kind of mood she is in. But as little girls do, the little girl grows up to be a woman and thirsts for adventure and ventures outside of the cave and its protective spell and the thicket which surrounds it, and goes off to seek her fortune and decides eventually that she's going to throw in her lot with a bunch of companions who follow a certain King Arthur, which should tell you where and when we're at and what kind of stuff we're dealing with. And it is her quest to join these knights that the book is largely concerned with. Although, in fact, what this brings her back to is the mystery of her parentage and why her mother is afraid and hiding in a cave all the time.
Yeah,
does that cover it?
I mean, to be fair, it's covered pretty quickly that the reason why her mother is afraid and hiding in a cave all the time is because she was kidnapped by the Fae folk, and eventually escaped with a magical goblet and also her unborn daughter. So
yeah, that works out.
It's,
but,
this
it's,
does not,
it's really
it does
the
not
details
dangle
more than
the
anything else.
mystery. It does not dangle the mystery really in front of the reader. It's a very straightforward book.
Yeah, it's more a mystery to Paratir herself, or Paratur, I should say. Oh, also, I should point out that since this, not only is this book set in Wales, but everybody is given their Welsh names. We're going to massacre all of the names of all of the people.
We are. I'm so sorry, people who know Welsh. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, the extent of both Isaac's and my Welsh knowledge is we read the Darkest Rising books, including the one that had including the Grey King, which talks a little bit about Welsh pronunciation when we were very young.
When the dark comes rising, 6 will turn it back. 3 from the circle and 3 from the track. I loved these books when I was a kid, and I'm disappointed there isn't more Bran/Wilfic out there.
Yes, I have the benefit of the audiobook, which is read by the author. So
Yes.
I know some things, but much of it has left my brain already. So we'll do our best. Why should you read this book?
It's good. It's short. It's fast. It's very well written. It's got if you like the whole Wizards versus Lesbians deal, this gives it to you. If you like Arthurian retellings, this is a good one. It is exhaustively researched, partly because much of the details of the period come I think the setting for this book comes out of the leftovers from Nicola Griffith's extremely long saga, which book 2 hasn't even come out yet, but book 1 is gigantic, set in early medieval England. So there's a great deal of despite the fact that this is in sort of nebulous fantasy early medieval England, there's a great deal of period accurate bits, including period accurate diversity in people of color, because, you know, she's thought up very, if you read the author's notes, there's extensive explanations for why it's actually extremely period accurate for there to be the guy from Spain and the black, you know, that there's a black knight of the Round Table and a Spanish one, etc. So that's all. Oh, and also, if you're not listening to the audiobook, there's very pretty illustrations by Ravina Tsai.
Yes, I was just paging through the ebook in order to remind myself of what we were doing and noticed those, and I was like, damn, those are some good illustrations.
What have I missed for why you should read the book?
I think that you pretty much covered it. Like, this book is, I mean, Nicola Griffith is the real deal, first of all. Like, this is an author.
Right. She's managed to write stuff that's extremely genre, but she's also got some pretty solid literary cred. Several of her previous books have been published by a literary imprint, and this one was actually sent over to Tor because it was slightly too fantasy for her usual literary publisher.
Yes, and I don't want to suggest that there's a two-tier system, or that, you know, she's slumming it or anything like that. She's an SF author first and foremost, I think.
She is,
but the prose reflects a literary attention to detail and care with sentence construction. If you like, you're going to have a good time with this book, I think. If you have any interest in the subject matter, if you're like an Arthurian legend person, I think you'll have a really good time with this book. I'm not, and I still had a really good time with this book. So, you know, and you know what? It does what it says on the tin. It's like King Arthur, but with lesbians. I mean, what more do you need?
Yeah, it's and again, exhaustively researched. I really enjoyed the heavily footnoted author's notes at the end. Which I really hope were in the audiobook.
Yes, they were.
Because this is what happens when you have your author get to read her own audiobook.
Yeah. Why shouldn't you read this book?
There are a couple times where I felt like the prose was just a little too flowery. It wasn't that it was bad, but it felt like it was verging on self-indulgence.
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing that comes with that sort of literary aura, is that it's not unhighfalutin. You know, I don't mind that.
No, me neither.
But it does. You do get the sense occasionally that this book thinks it's a little bit more groundbreaking than it is. But you know, that's not much.
Yeah, and I don't even think that the author's dead and all, but I think that some of that's just the author's writing style.
Yeah, the author's writing style is, I would say, very English.
And I would also say the book is, again, you and I, big fans of short, concise books. I think this book does a great job of packing a ton into its very short length. At the same time, and this is actually very much like her previous book, So Lucky, it moves at such a breakneck pace that it doesn't really have a lot of breathing room. And for me, that's fine. But if you're the sort of person who likes, you know, who really likes to have books that are a little bit longer and slower and explain a little bit more, then this will not be quite your favorite thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of grasping for reasons.
Right, so
here,
am I.
Honestly, like
I guess also if you're really sick of Arthuriana.
Yeah, no. If the brief summary, like this is King Arthur stuff with lesbians, makes you think ugh, then you're not gonna like this book, because that is just what is happening here. Basically. Okay. Content warnings. We discussed the abduction and rape.
Abduction, rape, mind control.
Yeah, stuff.
Suicide.
Yep. I think that's it, though. Some light sexism.
Yeah.
And all right, shall we head into the spoiler zone?
Let's.
Spoiler zone.
So I'm going to jump right in because I have a question for you.
Okay, give me the question.
So you were raised Jungian.
Yes, I was.
And this strikes, and I mean, I remember that I can't remember what it's called, but the one like terrible Jungian book that you had me read way, way, way back when,
Yes,
was about Percival and the Grail, right?
Yes, indeed it was.
Well, the book in question is He, Understanding Masculine Psychology by Robert Johnson. No, not that one. And a thing that has become clear to me is that Freud was better than Jung about gender politics. Astoundingly. In Freud, men and women have the same complexes and the same psychosexual structure. The way these complexes are expressed vary to one degree or another because of gender roles and conditioning, but the function structure of the psyche does not. But in Jung's work, it's predicated on a fundamental gender difference in the structure of the self, and this has been watered down by modern Jungians, but it is essential to Jung's work. You can't pretend otherwise. That the individuation process is different for men and women. It's a biological and mythological determinism. Thank you, Kiana.
So I'm really curious what you, as a raised culturally Jungian person, like what your take is on this particular, on what she's doing, particularly because the Jungian Percival and the Grail stuff is so rooted in gender essentialist stuff, and this is very gender bendy.
It is indeed. It is bendy as heck. And in fact, I mentioned the Percival and the Grail stuff just not last episode, but the episode before when we were talking about Last Exit, because I thought that impinged heavily on the medicine wheel stuff. I thought that was very Percival and the Grail.
So here we are, Percival, Paratur / Percival, and the Grail.
Yeah, no, and like all of that sort of Jungian stuff is completely kicked to the curb. Basically, this story not only doesn't even engage with it. It doesn't address it. Honestly, like the whole sort of. I think the closest it comes to it really is that it has the sort of adolescent rashness. The sort of the thing that struck me as particularly mythical and Jungian was when Paratur breaks her mother's gayage by calling to her so fiercely without knowing what she's doing. And that you could view that as that first attempt to get the Grail without knowing what your power is or who you are, and thereby causing problems that you basically have to spend the rest of your young life trying to fix. That would be where the sort of outline of that narrative comes. And then sort of returning to it and finding that, you do ultimately have to leave your mom behind, and that process may kill her if she is, the sort of mom that this person is. That's, that is definitely where more gender comes into it at that point. But it's there is a fair amount of I would say that where the resonance comes from me is that the Jungian interpretation of Percival and the Grail is you have to find your strength first, and then once you know who you are and you know what you want for real, then you can go back and claim the Grail. And in this story, Paratur
she finds her strength before she is at all interested in the Grail.
Yes, but there is sort of this continued echo of her getting what she thinks she wants and being like, wait, I won, but I'm still not happy,
Yeah, though, to be fair, she keeps winning but not getting what she wants.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
but
sort of...
she has a clear goal. It's not like she's getting her goal and then realizing that goal isn't making her happy. She has one thing that she's chasing after for the first 2/3 of the book, and she keeps winning on paper but being denied that thing, which is, acceptance into the companions.
Right. And you could sort of argue that part of her is her divine part, because she is much more in tune with her, divinity. And one of the things I want to circle back and discuss is what we think the Fae and divinity mean within this narrative particularly. But she seems to be more in touch with, even when she isn't aware that it's there, she is naturally in communion with her divine self. She doesn't have to access that. The knowledge of her parentage isn't required for her to use that power. In fact, it's actually a complicating factor.
Right, it really is.
So,
and that she really comes into her own both as a person, as an adult, and also into her power when her mother she's out in the world and has this, mental block and inability to remember anything about her childhood, basically.
Yes. But I think for the most part, that sort of the Jungian interpretive lens on this story is largely ignored.
Which is fine by me.
Exactly. And that works fine by me. But at the basic level where this is about becoming, the story of the Grail is a story about coming of age. Mm-hmm. And this is a story of coming of age,
Yeah.
That's in broad strokes. That's about as close as it gets. See, Freud would have loved that your mother had the Grail the whole time. As
far as I'm concerned, that's another reason to read the book. But perhaps if somebody was looking for Jungian undertones, that's a reason to not read the book.
I mean, it still smacks enough of the old myth to probably, make an open-minded Campbellian happy, and to make a strict Campbellian sad, but strict Campbellians deserve to be sad. So I actually, before you opened with that, I was going to open with something extremely frivolous, because we spent the intro talking about what a finely honed and crafty writer Nicola Griffith is. And I happened to open the ebook to exactly the page where I noted a line down, because it struck me that this was a darling that the author should have killed, where upon beginning to make out with Nimue, Paratur, it is said of Paratur that her breath sharpened and her breasts.
Yes, I remember that line.
I understand why she couldn't bring herself to remove that line from the book.
But come on.
Unless your intent with that passage was to make me burst out laughing, you have not hit your mark. But
yes,
that's notable by how unusual it is within the scope of this book.
Yes, but I also remember seeing both times I came across that line, because I read the book twice, and I had a similar reaction.
Yes.
But other than that, very good prose. So one thing that I think is interesting about this book is Paratur's relationship with her gender, because she seems fairly comfortable in being female. She never thinks about, does she want to be a man? She doesn't really question her gender. She seems very happy being a she. Mm-hmm. What she wants is to be a companion, and if that involves disguising herself as male, she's fine with that.
Yes.
And so, but it's still interesting, because with her first girlfriend, Angharad, her first girlfriend is clearly under the impression that she's a trans man. She sticks her hand down Paratur sticks the girl's hand down her pants to, explain things. And the girl is like, no, this is great. Presumably because she's like, great, I can have a boyfriend who won't get me pregnant and thus mess up my engagement with the boring stable boy. And, so I thought that was interesting, because normally when you read a book like this, there'd be a strong tendency to read Paratur as trans, as either gender fluid or non-binary or some form of trans. But when she's given the opportunity to come forward with, when she's coming forward with Lancelot, with Lance, about, her deep dark secret. It's specifically that she's, she's not Merlin's nephew.
Yes. Yeah, no, there's, well, I don't know. It's like when you say that there would be the temptation to read the character as trans, like, that may be
obviously,
true
if the author's dead, we can read every character however we want.
Yeah,
but
I'm just thinking like how old fashioned this book is in some ways, and it's like this book feels, gay to me, but not queer. If that isn't like without meaning to like to suggest all like the political stuff that might imply about the author. I'm not even going to touch any of that.
I probably shouldn't be the one making this distinction, 'cause even though I'm not entirely straight, Alexis has blue hair and pronouns, and thus wins.
Okay, I'll stop trying.
No, I mean, like, no. To be fair, I brought this up, so I think. I think a gay but not queer isn't a particularly useful frame of analysis because the terms are so slippery.
Yeah.
But this feels. But I think that this is very much supposed to be. This is a story about a lesbian. This is a story about a butch lesbian who's comfortable cross-dressing, but she is definitely a lesbian. And the fact that the author writes basically books entirely about lesbians and is herself very, out and proud lesbian, probably, is part of this. But I think it's also, I actually think it's not necessarily as old-fashioned as all that. I think that, because I think that her very sort of definiteness about who she is, again, she doesn't know anything about being part fae, and she doesn't, she can't remember her own childhood really, or, she can't remember anything about her parentage. But she's very definite in who she is for herself. And I think that that's what makes it partly not a trans narrative, is that there's no questioning about her sort of fundamental self. She's very clear that she's interested, that, she is a woman who's interested in women.
Yes, she's a woman who's interested in women and who wants to be a knight. Or a companion. And do you know which character she reminded me of out of all the characters we've discussed?
Which character?
Utena Tenjo. Because like she's a jock. She has little to no self-reflection except when warranted.
She's the chosen one of a sort.
She's a chosen one. She, her goal is as simple as I want to be a prince. She wants to help people. The thing is, like, and
again, the Utena narrative is much more trans than this one, because prince is a gendered thing in a way that King Arthur's companion is not.
Well, I mean, it would have been though at this time, It
would have been, but the thing is that prince is itself a gendered word.
Mm.
You can't, if you're a girl who wants to be a prince, there's something a little bit trans about that.
Whereas if you're a girl who wants to be a knight, you just want to maybe change the society enough that you can be a girl who is a knight.
Right, or you can be perfect, because, like, Utena would actually, I think, is in fact extremely unhappy when she's mistaken for a boy. Like, Utena is not... versus Percival, because she's so settled in herself, doesn't actually, is never upset when she's mistaken for a man.
That is true. She is, she's blithe, almost.
Right.
To the point of being infuriating in some ways. But I mean, she also, if we're talking about like, elements of transness, she's literally Paratur Paladir Tyr, the Paratur Hardspear, and is named by her girlfriend. It's like, here comes Percival Hardcock, basically.
Right.
Percy Cock, Percy being another name for cock.
Right.
And her weapon is the spear. So
yes.
Even if there's no transness there, she's definitely got a rod and is planning on using it. So
right. Which again, like this is the sort of thing that, again, if I feel like if this were a different book, and I'm sure that some readers will read this and go, no, this is super trans narrative, but I thought it was interesting how much this seems to be very much saying, no, this is a story about lesbians. This is a story about women who want to have sex with women.
Yes. That is very much the case. And also there are no damsels also. You know, if you want to go, like, the relationship between Nimue and Merlin, or Merlin, or Merdin, or however you want to pronounce it, is definitely a sort of Akio-Anthe kind of a relationship.
Right, but before Parator even shows up, Nimue has already defeated Merlin.
Yes, which is very, I think that's perhaps one of the largest statements, honestly, is that Parator shows up to an environment where Nimue is in a position to help Parator and not the other way around, because Nimue has already shown herself perfectly capable of overcoming her trauma and literally drowning her wizard in a lake.
Yes.
And so,
I mean, there is a damsel, because there's Parator's first girlfriend, who, you know, she rescues from Sir Kay being a dick.
Yes. Well, you know, rescues, but like that's sort of, right. You know, yeah, I guess that they're, but you know, Nimue, who's so central to the story,
who's the real love interest here.
Yeah, is not a damsel.
No, she's not.
Speaking of Sir Kay, I liked his characterization.
Yeah, me too. I liked that, you know,
go ahead.
He was such a bro, right? Like,
yeah.
he could be really, really awful when he's, you know, when he's challenged in his vulnerable spots. But like when he's emasculated, basically. But when he's, you know, just defeated fair and square in a jousting type situation, he thinks this is hilarious, and you know, becomes a real supporter.
I mean, in this genre, we deal with a lot of, you know, men who are assholes, and that's it. I liked the fact that this book went out of its way to show, yes, Kay is an asshole, undoubtedly, but he's not evil.
Right.
He's complicated. He's in a stressful position of authority, and his ego is both good for him in that and bad for him in that.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the tension there. And that's also true of Arthur, actually, and Lancelot, in a certain way. Although, you know, maybe I was hasty in calling this a gay not queer book, because, you know, by Lancelot in a triad relationship with Guinevere and Arthur is another thing that this book posits, in a almost certainly unintentional mirroring of the dinner party sequence from Harrow the Ninth, when Parator and Nimue deceive them and feed them aphrodisiacs, so they all go to have the grown-up threesome that we desperately don't want to see them have.
And then indeed that, you know, cuts, because this narrative is basically entirely in Parator's head. It's a very close third. So so we do not have to get subjected to the threesome, because Parator isn't going to sit around and watch.
No, I don't. Nobody is interested in this, but yes, there's a lot for Wizards versus Lesbians book. There's actually a fair amount of looking at masculinity, I guess. Both looking at masculinity as Parator embodies it in certain ways. If you want to get, again, Jungian with it, like Parator is a knight to the core, and is interested in helping people, and that's pretty much it. And then, you know, seeing the ways that this comes out, like the masculine, like Kay's masculinity, which is hobbled in a certain way, and Arthur's masculinity, which is hobbled by his reliance on Caladvolk, and
Speaking of phallic symbols.
Yes. Yeah, the king looking at the lesbian being like, you want to take my sword and use it, don't you?
Right. Right.
I bet you do.
Exactly.
And it's like, I have my own long pointy object, thank you very much. And then Lance's like limp, his birth defect. Was it his birth defect or a childhood injury?
Yeah, it is a birth defect.
Right.
I mean, we don't know for sure, but it seems to be.
Right, which is, which in fact makes him the best of them. But, it is, again, like sort of his heroic masculinity working against an obstacle. And it is Parator's masculinity, quote unquote masculinity, which is allowed to sort of operate unfettered and in an archetypal way. Possibly because she's a woman. Or,
because I think because she really has absolutely nothing invested in her, in like upholding any sort of masculine pride.
Right. She doesn't have Kay's pride. She doesn't have Arthur's paranoia and vulnerability. She doesn't have Lance's, lingering gray cloud around his injury.
Which isn't so much. I mean, it's interesting with Lance because it's clear that he's pretty much at peace with his, with his disability, and especially because it makes him, the best writer in the bunch. But
the author's dead and all, but we're not going to get an unnuanced take on disability from Nicola Griffith.
Right, we're not. But at the same time, we do get to see some of the negative impacts it's had on his life. Where, for example, he doesn't have a relationship with his son. Partly with his illegitimate son, partly because he's afraid that his son will reject him for being physically imperfect.
Yeah, no, that was what I was trying to get at, I guess, I knew there was something with it, and I was having a hard time remembering what the exact thing was. But yeah, no, it's his inability to connect with his son because of the feeling that, because of two things, actually. And I do kind of want to get around to talking about how this book treats Christianity also.
Yeah.
And versus the Fae. And I have a third question, but before we embark on any of those, was there more that you wanted to say about that before I segue us off somewhere else?
Nope, let's segue off somewhere else.
Segueing off to somewhere else.
Okay, a thing that I wanted to ask you is, like, here, a thing that comes up repeatedly is the idea with Parator specifically, and like this seems to be one of the few things that gives her pause and sort of makes her think, self-hating or self-doubting thoughts, is cleanliness. The idea and purity. And Parator is very invested in purity. And the thing that the book posits as impure is possession.
Yes.
Again, like this book really does hit every wizard versus lesbian theme in order. But it is the wizardly possession of the woman that Parator is revolted by, the Fae's possession of her mother as well. And it's the idea that she, using her Fae power, could possess or influence other people that she finds revolting.
Well, also the fact that, that when she has her like soul bond moment with Nimue, that like possibly she left herself open for Nimue to possess her.
Yes, indeed. So this seems to me like a recapitulation of one of the oldest themes that we've seen in these books, which is like, how do I, as a lesbian, avoid the shittier parts of the standard heterosexual dynamic when I am to love a woman, or to fight a man, I guess, as this comes up in both contexts, because the particular locus of the uncleanliness for her is the power imbalance.
I don't think it's just the power imbalance, actually, because she and Nimue are fairly evenly matched, especially early on, and that's still, it's because it's not just the power imbalance that revolts her about their initial like mind merge.
It's not just that, but it is part of it. I think that like I wrote down literally, it says it is unclean to have something more powerful inside you.
Yes.
Is a phrase that she actually says, or Nimue says. But yes, what else do you think is going into it?
I mean, I think that it's also, she's somebody who is so secure in herself that you know, and nothing she does externally can threaten that. She can dress up as a boy. She's fine with that. She can be, you know, she can assist the companions in their ambush battle completely anonymously. She doesn't have any kind of ego, but I think shaking that internal sense of self for her is terrifying. You know, what she wants is for, she says that what she wants is for everything to be clean and bright. And this is the opposite, and you know, like any kind of mind touching is sort of the opposite of bright. And it's the opposite of like clean lines. Yeah,
and the vulnerability of being loved is certainly a part of that.
Right. Yeah. Some of it's
the
just
idea
fear
that
of
Nimue could
vulnerability.
touch or affect her, right? And I guess this is part of, again, how she is dealing with masculinity, in that she is. Oh my God! I've just completely lost the train of that thought. Can you help me out?
Unfortunately, I was getting distracted looking up who said it was an unclean thing, and actually, we're both kind of off here because Nimue is the one who's really worried that their brain touching is unclean, and Peritur at first the thing that makes her appalled is the idea that somebody could think she was unclean.
Right. So it's the idea of being identified with that kind of force, that sort of Merlin-y force, and then it's the trauma on behalf that Nimue suffered at the hands of Merlin that this is reminding them of.
Right, exactly.
So that makes sense, and it's the idea of having touched that trauma, and the idea that she could be something like Merlin or something like her father is what revolts her.
Yes. Also, the only thing that really makes Peritur upset, I mean, not the only thing, but one of the major things that repeatedly makes her upset is being rejected. She's like, she really wants to belong. She wants to, you know, be herself, but she really wants to belong. She gets, you know, she's upset when she gets, when she has her first fight with Sir Kay, and is basically not allowed to tag along. And then she's upset when this also leads to her losing her part-time job.
Yes.
And, you know, because like she did the right thing. Why is she being excluded and exiled? And she's really upset that Arthur won't accept her into the companions. And I think that she's really, part of why she's really upset with Nimue is that, you know, Nimue has seen into her soul and at least in the moment is rejecting her.
That makes sense. Yes. It does. I think that I remembered what I wanted to say. That whole idea of everything being clean and bright feels like a kind of a wizardly ambition almost. And it is interesting in that at the end of the book, what they choose to do is to deny Arthur immortality, essentially.
Right.
You know, they decide that they're not going to set him up to create the Empire of Wales, which is what he would do if they let him have an heir.
Yes. Well, and that basically, you know, this is because they don't trust him with his magical sword.
Yes, exactly. Because Arthur might have a real shot with his undefeatable magic sword of creating another Roman Empire, essentially.
Yeah, though, I mean, it's very explicitly not about, you know, his ambitions not about his ambitions. It's that he, you know, they don't want these powerful objects in the world anymore. And they can't take it away from Arthur. But if he has a son, then he will give that sword to the son, and they still won't be able to take it away. But if he doesn't have a son, then they can say, well, he promised to give it back and let us toss it in the lake.
So that brings me to my second question, which is, what are these powerful objects? What does this mean? Beyond like being locuses of, faith and culture power in the way that they have been for other books that we've talked about. How did you interpret the presence of the Fae in this story?
It's interesting because you've got your sword, you've got your stone, you've got your cup, you've got your spear. So you've got your like 4 tarot suits.
Yes.
And it's, and you've got, your Fae sort of old gods. And what really interested me is that none of this is set up in opposition to Christianity. They just sort of exist side by side. And like, and there's this idea that the power of the Fae and possibly the Fae themselves should really be pushed away from and cut off from the mortal world.
Oh, Alexis, I caught that you were about to say that the Fae should be phased out. And frankly, you should have.
But that's about power imbalance.
Yes.
It's not, this is not, which is really rare, I think, for a sort of pagan-inflected Arthurian retelling. Cough, cough, Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Oh boy.
That's this is not. Well, we're not doing her. We're not doing Mists of Avalon when we do Marion Zimmer Bradley, but like this just isn't anti-Christian. Like Christianity. I mean, this isn't like pro-Christian. The Christian priest we have is kind of a drunk. But there's the guy for whom Christianity is clearly meaningful and powerful, and there's Lance's son who's being raised by monks, and Lance seems to think that this is a pretty good situation, except for possibly rejecting him. So this is not, they're not in opposition. They just sort of can coexist and not, so this isn't a story of, even though we know, because this is the early medieval period, we know that like Christianity is only going to spread, and there will eventually be a Church of England. But inside the world of the story, this isn't about Christianity displacing the old gods, and it's not about the old gods even necessarily like fading away. It's about the old gods are, because they are embodied and act like people, are extremely, they're not even necessarily gods. They're just extremely powerful people, and when you have that kind of power imbalance in the world, it leads to horrible things.
Right. So you could view it in that reading as just this is why we don't let, billionaires exist, or, why that's not
right.
a good idea.
Well, I mean, that's the wizard narrative, right? I mean, part of why like we get so many sort of Silicon Valley billionaire-esque wizards in our more science fiction-y stories is that, that's our modern day wizard archetype.
Indeed. So yeah, it's sort of the imbalance of the gods' presence on Earth. Although you could have sort of as an alternate viewpoint, there is interestingly a way to read this that's sort of that's kind of pro-enlightenment, pro-civilization. Like we need to lock away the darkness, which is, again, as you said, very weird for a pagan leading book like this. But the book is absolutely almost scrupulous to give a fair shake to all of the forces arrayed in this, which felt to me like a consequence of the level of research.
Right. Yeah. If you've ever read Hild, which is a book that weighs almost as much as my cat, it's just exhaustively researched. Yeah,
but I mean the sort of. I found the aside near the end of the book where I think it's Paratur asking Nimue, so what are the Engels actually like? And
Nimue's like, they're not actually really any different.
They're just people. And it was like, yes, so that's the other thing about the tragedy of the fall of King Arthur. It's like just there's more people, and there's a lot of different people. Like I really do like the way, as you mentioned very near the top of the book, says, and there's the Vikings, and there's the Romans, and there's the Moors, and here's this, and here's that, and it's like, this is just, there's people, and they travel around, and it's not that hard to get across the English Channel. And blah, blah,
like,
blah, blah,
especially because this is a former Roman outpost, and Rome was a Mediterranean empire. So you're gonna get some North Africans at your former Roman outpost.
Right, exactly. Like, what did Hannibal look like exactly? And
right,
going on from there.
But yeah, it's I don't actually think it's necessarily about we need to lock away the dark and pro-civilization, because it's so rooted. Paratour's origin story is so rooted in her attunement with nature and her love of, her friendship with the trees and the cats and the lake. This really is aware of the beauty of nature. And I mean, and one of the things actually that's great about this is that this beautiful natural grove that she grows up in is rewilded land. It's not that it was wild. When the Roman Empire stretched this far, there was settlement there. And then when the Roman Empire fell, the farming population contracted, and now there's these wild forests again. But so that, which is also
sure.
It's cyclical. The entire story is cyclical, right? It's about her leaving home and then coming home again. But that cycle's also woven into the setting, where this was a place that was part of an empire, and then it has faded and gone back to the trees. But we know that it's going to be, that really Rome itself is in fact going to reconquer, just in the form of the Catholic Church. In just a few generations.
It is remarkable. The feeling of historicity in here, is extremely unusual. Again, all that research, will inform that. But the way that it all feels like it's occurring in real time, when Arthuriana usually, takes place within a misty, before legendary period, makes it oddly super grounded in reality, while at the same time being magical. And really the most magical part of it is that, as you point out, Paratour is like the best person in the world. Like, Paratour is kind of, a Disney princess and also Goku. She has every advantage. She
right,
can,
she
has every advantage you could
one.
possibly ask for. She can read minds. She's she's an incredible soldier. Animals respond to her touch. She's beloved by the country folk. Although I also really did appreciate the bit where she goes back to the country folk at the end after she's become a companion and has to reckon with the cost of having left that other world behind in order to gain that power. And I think that experience probably informed her decision to not give the Grail to Arthur and Guinevere.
Because
once again, that's
the first time where
that's
she really
not belonging.
Gets to feel
right?
how her power imbalance hurting. Right, it's not belonging, but it's also
exactly.
the power balance is in her favor,
it's
and she's still getting rejected.
Power and becoming a companion is going to make her completely immune to this thing, which is the thing that she hates the most, which is not belonging, not having a home, which of course is a result of her having been cast out of her home by her mom, and she chooses to leave. But I mean, she chooses
she's not really
to leave,
cast out. She chooses to leave.
Most people, when they leave home, can come back.
But her mother then cuts her off. Yeah, and her mother very explicitly goes,
right. This is a classic.
If you leave, you're never coming back.
This is the classic.
Also,
classic
you're breaking my heart.
But bad mom for very good reasons.
Yeah, I think she's slightly more sympathetic to me than most bad moms. Partly, because her reasons are very obvious, but mostly because, as much as she's manipulative and tries to guilt her daughter into staying,
she does.
She does give her name, and and this is part of her entire pattern of trying to get Paratour to stay with her, is to try to make her happier. It's not to undermine her. So when she starts noticing Paratour sort of wandering further and further, she teaches her how to read, so that she can experience vicariously the outside world. And when that isn't enough, and she says, no, I have to leave in search of my name, she gives her name. And, she still leaves.
Yeah.
And her mother lets her go. So she's still a terrible mom, but by terrible mom standards, she's a little bit more sympathetic.
The bad mom
than most,
says, you're going to kill me by leaving, essentially. Like, you're breaking my heart. You've broken my heart. She's right. Paratour's leaving does in fact kill her mother, but it's also like in the fullness of time.
Well, it's not her leaving; it's her attempt to go home.
Yeah, but it's the whole process. Like there was no way that was going to be avoided, and like her mother knew exactly how it was going to go down from the beginning.
Yes,
and I think that one of the things that I enjoyed about this book is the idea that sometimes it will do your mother or your parent, or like if your parent is sufficiently fucked for whatever reason that you leaving them is going to be an enormous wound to them, you still have to inflict that wound. You still have to leave.
Right. And sometimes it can be a serious, real harm that's, that isn't just, self-inflicted by the parent. It isn't,
I think more often than not, these wounds do come from without, whether the child knows that or not, but that doesn't change what the child has to,
right,
what
exactly.
decisions the child has to make,
Right, and the narrative at no point pretends that Paratour should stay at home.
Right. That's one of the many things about this book that I really appreciated was that particular deal.
Yeah, just in general. Again, for such a short, fast-paced book, there's a lot of layers and a lot of nuance in this.
Yeah, I was foolish to suggest that we might combine this with something else. There's still plenty of meat on the bones, and we're 50 minutes into this recording.
Mm-hmm.
And then I couldn't think of what else to talk about.
We could talk more about the relationship between her and Nimue.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into that.
Yeah, we've only sort of touched on the beginning of it, and also the fact that for all that Nimue does freak out when they do their mind touching because of the power imbalance, and because this invokes her trauma where she's been possessed and mind controlled by Merlin in the past. There's even though Paratour is this sort of mythical creature, the half demigod. There's a lot of other things that sort of help balance the power. I mean, Nimue has all this institutional power, and she also has all this extra learning. Mm-hmm. So she has all these things that Paratour wants. She has the lake, which is the thing that Paratour has been questing after the entire time.
Yes.
And she has knowledge about herself and her past and her own powers. And she has the respect of, the king and all of the knights. Because of all of this, and also, Nimue has already taken down her wizard. Paratour has not yet taken down her wizard. She doesn't even know she has a wizard to take down yet.
Indeed.
And so, it's a really interesting... They have this sort of... They're very balanced in complementary... ways. They're different powers.
Yes, exactly. That even though, as I mentioned before, Paratour is like, S tier, beats everybody character. Nimue has everything that she lacks. So together they really are, absolutely unstoppable.
This unstoppable force.
Because Nimue is also a very powerful mage. Although it's not entirely clear where she comes by those powers, since she is 100% mortal. But I guess that is the other thing that I wanted to talk about. Like, would you see this as a sort of like ethnically or heritage derived magic system, in the way that like the Unbroken and the Fireheart Tiger and a bunch of other stuff is posited?
Not in the same way. I mean, Paratour is a demigod, and so that is heritable power. Which is not my favorite trope. But there's nothing about Nimue, and Nimue's is more powerful than Merlin. And Ellen,
Mervyn, I believe in.
And Ellen, her mother, Parator's mother, is also more powerful than Merlin. And, we have these, and it's not, I don't actually think it's entirely clear if, maybe Merlin just was naturally less powerful than these two. But maybe it's that, instead of developing whatever talents and abilities he had, he chose to be a parasite on vulnerable young women.
Yes.
And so this is why they end up eclipsing and outshining him.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think that probably what we're looking at here, particularly because Merlin and Nimue are siblings, is...
No. Merlin and Ellen, Parator's mother, are siblings.
Yeah, sorry. Merlin and Ellen are siblings. I think that we're looking at talent as a sort of a combination of nature and nurture, but there's definitely a sort of inherited giftedness that is being posited here, and or a heroic nature, and the book is more concerned with the proper way to use that power than it is with positing that power as something with an external source, even though we have these Fey artifacts, which incidentally lose their power the more humans use them. The more every time they get stolen from the Fey, they get less potent. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's possibly it might be
every time they get stolen from the Fey lose power.
Yes. And I think that you could then view this magic system as more in the magic equals archetype vein. That magic is the great idea vein that you get in, for example, the Unspoken Name and the Thousand Eyes. Where these god figures are embodying, because the particular, her father is a water god, right? Which is part of what her attraction to the lake is all about. Mm-hmm. And it's about humans can become more powerful by accessing these big ideas healing, and or the stone, constancy, that kind of thing. But but you can't fully embody them, and there are certain ways that it's good or it's bad to use them.
But also we see the way that having that kind of power can corrupt. We because Arthur, we don't get to see Arthur for very long, but we can tell that he used to be young and idealistic, and now his paranoia over losing his magical sword has also ended up weakening his entire vision for his empire.
Indeed. Not only that, but his irrational, I don't know why you would hate the English. Who would ever hate the English? His irrational Welsh hatred for the English. Did you have any thoughts about Guinevere as a character? We don't get to spend a lot of time with her, but
we don't get to spend a lot of time with her. Part of the thing is that in Arthuriana, at least in sort of as it's interpreted these days, the central facet of Guinevere's character is her unfaithfulness.
Yes.
And that's been taken away by making them a happy polytriad. So, albeit closeted. So, what we mostly just get to see is somebody who's, she's loved and influential, but also just seems a little bit sad all the time.
Yeah, no, position of, which feels like just, this is what a queen is like.
Right.
This is definitely a sort of very heavy lies the head kind of a book. People in power don't seem to be particularly happy to be in power for the most part, and the happy ending that we get for our main couple is that they get to go away somewhere basically and live a life without worrying about this kind of thing. So before, and yeah, no, I guess probably like the taking away the sort of infidelity aspect of it refocuses us on her infertility as kind of her defining character trait.
Yeah. And
which,
it's probably for the best that it doesn't lean into that too much.
Yeah.
It's
you can't really get away from that with the Arthur legend, but
right. And so I mean, the one thing is that this is a Guinevere who has the main thing that most Guineveres want, which is both of her lovers together, happy. And and what she seems to want the most in this book is some time alone.
Yes. Thank you both. Great. Now will you please let me be in the garden for just a second? Yeah.
So
the downside of the poly life is not getting a whole bunch of me time.
But I wanted to loop back to your question about what makes this different, because this is something of an inborn hereditary magic system. But what makes it different from the Unbroken or Fireheart Tiger is that it doesn't seem to be about ethnicity. There's no implication that the Welsh have this and the English are going to have their own separate magical power. Mm-hmm. It's some people have some magical power. Sometimes they even learn how to use it. Yeah.
And it feels like it's not really important that the Grail isn't actually the blood that the Christ, or the cup that the Christ's blood was poured into. Mm-hmm. These are just two ways of talking about the same thing, and it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the story which of them is true.
Right.
It's just, the cup is powerful and should not be used.
Yeah.
And we have different names for magic.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything about this book that made you mad, since we're getting up to the hour mark here?
Let's go off to the grumpy zone. Let's go off to the grumpy zone. Let's go off to the grumpy zone. No grumps allowed.
There really wasn't anything that made me mad. I mean, we've talked about the, it's the sort of born special is not my favorite trope, but you can't really get away from it if you're dealing in Arthuriana.
Yeah. No, there was nothing about it that upset me either. Honestly, I just had a really good time with this book. It's just fun.
It's fun book. And it's so fast.
Yeah, and
I guess that is the one thing is I got to the end and I was like, wait, really? And it's not that it felt unsatisfying. It's just that it doesn't, it just barrels along and suddenly you're at the end.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's about the same length as Amatka.
Right, and Amatka feels twice as long, partly because...
Right, exactly.
Partly because with Spear, you're sort of... You and Parator are just sort of racing along to get to the end. And with Amatka, every single step, you just want to go, no, stop!
Right. Exactly. No, we get the full hero's journey here, and in Amatka, we cover 2 weeks of real time.
Each day more filled with dread than the next.
Right, exactly. Unless we have anything else to bring up to this book, I think that covers it.
Yeah, and we're gonna do so next week. We are doing what is realizing my dream for the podcast, which was to get a review copy of a book.
Yes.
So
we're going to do Uncommon Charm by Kat Weaver and Emily Bergsland. And I will do this full disclosure at the beginning of that podcast, but they are friends of mine. I've slept on their couch, so
I've never met them though, so I can be entirely unbiased.
Exactly, Alexis's opinion will be completely free of bias, but I think
except that they did give me a free book, so
yes. But I think thankfully both of us liked the book anyway, so we won't have to
yes,
go out of our way.
I really do think that the charm in the title is quite accurate.
Indeed. So look forward to some Edwardian Mitford sisters meet Utena action next time around. And until then,
All
bye-bye.
Bye.